So welcome to Milestones Series 2, The Windrush Nation. I'm Mike Johnson, and I'm joined today with co-host Dr. Dwayne Neal, OBE. Milestones is the podcast that has been reviewing the significant contributions made in the UK Black community since 1948. In this second series, The Windrush Nation, we're taking an inclusive approach by expanding the guest list to include contributions made by people whose heritage is from the Caribbean, Africa, and Black British people with a dual heritage.
Okay. And Mike, it's wonderful to be teamed up with you again on the Milestone series. I have to say that this series is very close to my heart because it's about our story, it's about our community, and as you've rightfully said already, it's about the Windrush Nation. And this series, of course, for us, highlights a number of key areas where contributors and big hitters in our community have been contributing. Today, of course, we're going to be focusing on those in the STEM areas. But just to give viewers a sense of where we're likely to go across the series, we'll be looking at politics and sport, we'll be looking at media, and of course, the good and the great. And my particular favorite, we'll be looking at some of the geniuses in our community. And we'll go on to be talking about the business, big hitters and philanthropists. So those are just some of the areas. We've got more than 10 areas that we will touch on. But it is my great pleasure also to just briefly introduce our two guest contributors. Both of them are good friends of mine. Rudy Page, who runs his own show and he's all over the community in a variety of ways. And Rudy, feel free to say a few words by way of your own introduction after this. And Winston Bygraves, Pastor Winston Bygrave is a minister of a number of churches, and I've known Winston for a good number of years. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Great to be here, Dwayne. Back on Milestones again. Good to see you, Mike, Winston.
Yes, sir. Well, you're across my feed everywhere I go. I'm seeing Rudy Page. I'm seeing.
Yes, I've been around a long time.
This man, but it's all good. It's all good, mate. It's all good. You're doing a great job. And I think before Winston comes in, just say a little bit about the names of people that we're going to be reviewing. We mentioned Africa. Now, Windrush, instinctively you think Caribbean, but Africa, we're looking at the fact that many people from the African continent came to the UK in the spirit of Windrush. You know, few came first, settled, sent for their children, and so on, and they continued to make, large inroads into the UK. So we wanted to include those as well. And then the people of mixed heritage, they've got maybe a Nigerian and a Jamaican and other, it's all happening, and we need to be inclusive of that in what we're doing. So those are the concepts behind what we're doing with the Milestone, the Windrush Nation. And perhaps one of the first things we could talk about is, what does the Windrush Nation mean to you? But Winston, over to you.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's great to be on Milestones today, and great to see you, Rudy, and my good friend Dwayne. As Dwayne said, I'm a Baptist minister. I pastor a church in West Hendon, which is northwest London, but I'm also a regional minister for the London Baptist, and I oversee about 50 churches in the northwest area of London. They cover the boroughs of Brent, Barnet, Enfield, and Hillingdon. And but prior to that, my previous life, I was a teacher. My last role was as a deputy head, again in the northwest London school. And so great to be here, and great to talk about the Windrush generation, as well as I'm glad that you've expanded it to as well the continent of Africa, because in many of our churches, especially in London, our congregation consists of many Nigerians and Ghanaians. In fact, in my own church, my main leaders are Nigerian and Ghanaian young men and young women. So great to be here. and to contribute. Thank you.
Fantastic. So picking up on the message that Mike mentioned about being inclusive, we have three professors, would you believe, that we should be talking about in this episode. They're all established in their field of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, known as STEM. And the three professors we'll be talking about are Professor Kevin Fenton, Professor Frank Chinigwando, and Professor Richard Orifo. Some of you listeners may well have heard of one of them, or the lucky ones may well have heard of all three. But let me kick off by saying a few words about Kevin Fenton. And notice I've moved away from the professor because Kevin is a friend of mine. And of course, he is an expert in the public health field, and particularly so in infectious diseases. He's an epidemiologist, for those of you who are familiar with that particular branch of science. But he's led in a number of leadership capacities around the UK, and not least of which, the COVID-19 response. He was a big part of that. So let me pause there and invite Mike and our guests to say a few words of their own about Kevin Fenton.
Dwayne, I'd like to say a few words. Kevin played an important part during COVID in particular. Not only did he write a significant report that was presented to Parliament, but throughout COVID, and you will remember, there was a time where the African and Caribbean population groups were actually being focused on as not being involved, the level of hesitancy within the community when it came to taking the vaccine, even though at the same time the community was being affected disproportionately, because obviously COVID brought to light the health inequalities that we all knew about from a system perspective. And why Kevin was important in terms of being on the public platforms was that we developed a program called the Trusted Messengers. And what that meant, those of us who were working within the system, it was important to see people of African and Caribbean population groups, the faith leaders, the pharmacists, the doctors, the nurses, all the clinicians, the public health specialists, making sure their voice is heard. And the focus was on three areas. One, to ensure the community was informed, and then reassured, because people who they could trust from their families and the communities, and so that people could then make their choice. So the strategy was around informed, assurance, or reassurance even, and so people can make their choice. So Kevin's work, because of the profile, is on the Today program and many other programs and many online programs. It was significant because of the challenges that our community has when it comes to systemic issues. So he's very well respected for how he handled himself, because there were some significant challenges that he had, because obviously even though you're presenting a particular argument, there's a counter argument, and you've got to hold your own in those particular spaces, especially on public platforms. And I think he did very well.
Do you think, Rudy, that the message was received from the Black community more readily because it was coming from someone of their own?
Well, the significant importance of it, going back to my point about the trusted messengers, that it was important that we had people from our community. Donald Palmer's a great example. The clarity in which he explained about the immune system is still way ahead of anything that we heard. But the reality is, coming from our population groups, then we struggled to get our voice heard. But I think our professionals and our faith leaders did very well to ensure that our community did at least get the information that they needed so that they could, make their choice, because it was very difficult, because there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation as well. Even though, as I said very early on, both in our workforce and our community was disproportionately hit by COVID. And particularly in those first few months, I don't think the Caribbean community have lost as many people in such a short space of time ever since all of us have been alive anyway.
And, Kevin's impact, I feel, will continue, because our research shows that he is the regional director in the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities for London. So the role that you described that he played during COVID, he will continue to play a similar role, and possibly an enhanced role, in this new position. Winston, any thoughts, any feelings, any tidbits about Professor Kevin Fenton from your perspective?
I just want to say, just as an educator, I just think it's great to have such a role model, especially coming from the Caribbean, for our young men and young women. And it's really important that they see a spread of successful young men and young women from the Caribbean community. So I think that's really good, as well as that media profile that he has had. And I think that's really just positive for the generation coming forward now.
Yeah.
It's really important that our community is seen and heard on public platforms, and can articulate, the message, and deal with the challenges as well, to show that there's depth to what's being said, and they understand the topic. And I think that's really important. So Winston's point again, to see, for our young people, just to see and hear that, it will inspire somebody to understand that actually that's the way I need to be if I'm going to go into the public domain.
Well, Rudy, your point is so important, because if we're going to develop the thinking and the mentality of our young people, then they do need to see the talent that we have. And we have a great depth of talent in a variety of areas. And in part, that is why Milestone Series 2 was such an important project for Mike and I, because through this medium, we're hoping that everybody across our community, young and old, will gain an understanding of the big hitters. So, it feels like by just talking about a small number of STEM contributors, we're basically saying our community, the Windrush Nation, is rich with STEM scientists, and they are distinguishing themselves in a variety of sectors. These are just a small sample of the many sectors that they are making their mark, making their contribution, and we should all be incredibly proud of them. And so when I look at the three people that we've talked about, not just their jobs, but in the other things they're doing, I see ongoing real life contribution. I think they're doing it because they see the real need, and they also see how they can help. Now,
it's the right thing to do.
It will not be a panacea that cures all the challenges out there, but they have enough compassion to say, I can make a contribution. I don't think they're building legacy. I think they're saying there is real need now, and I can do something. That was the very clear sense I got from talking with Richard Orifo, because he could see a need. How do I help those who didn't have the financial backing, but had the intellectual horsepower? That was why the Cowrie Foundation became a real thing.
Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to you coming together again in the next episode. Take care.
Rudy, Winston, thank you, my friends, and Mike, to be continued.
Indeed. All right. Take care now.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.